With the Russian command getting desperate and spring arriving, mega assaults were launched across the whole local front line in the hope of achieving a breakthrough. However, the Ukrainian defenders were prepared to cause the enemy disproportionately high losses. Across the entire front line, a clear pattern has emerged over the past weeks, with Russian progress stalling. In response, the Russian High Command has resorted to intensified, large-scale assaults across multiple directions, leading to catastrophic losses. According to Ukrainian officials, just within a matter of 5 days after the Russian spring offensive started, enemy forces suffered over 8,000 killed and severely wounded. Nowhere is this dynamic more visible than in Lyman, which has become one of the hottest zones of the front line. Recently, Russian forces have launched relentless assaults here, aiming to break through toward Sloviansk and regain operational momentum. In response, Ukraine's 3rd Army Corps has implemented a highly effective active defense, combining layered fortifications with constant drone surveillance, ground drone operations, and precision strikes. Russian units are repeatedly identified, fixed, and destroyed before they can consolidate gains, as Ukrainian forces target their command nodes, logistics routes, and assault groups in real time. Despite constant pressure, these methods have denied Russia any breakthrough, keeping the sector firmly under Ukrainian control. The Russian command launched one of the largest mechanized assaults seen in recent months to regain the initiative, with the most intense push happening near Chandriholove. This is where Russian forces committed a significant part of over 500 troops, 28 armored vehicles, and more than 100 motorcycles and buggies thrown forward along a broad sector of around 150 kilometers in a coordinated attempt to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. The Russian assault began early in the morning, aiming to exploit the advantage of fog cover and rapidly penetrate Ukrainian lines by using fast-moving buggies and motorcycles, supported by armored vehicles to provide firepower. Unfortunately for the Russians, the very scale and composition of the attack exposed critical vulnerabilities, as constant Ukrainian drone surveillance through aerial and ground drones detected it early. Even the quickest Russian vehicles were successfully intercepted by Ukrainian FPV drones before reaching their objectives, with dozens of Russian soldiers not even managing to dismount. Heavier Russian armored vehicles were restrained by the terrain that was remotely mined by Ukrainian drones and funneled into predictable routes where they became trapped in kill zones. As the first vehicles were destroyed by waves of Ukrainian kamikaze drones, the advancing columns stalled, creating congestion and making subsequent targets even easier to engage. The systematic dismantling of the assault followed, with Russian soldiers abandoning damaged vehicles seeking cover in nearby forested areas, only to be struck by precise Ukrainian artillery fire. Those who attempted to hide were tracked using thermal drone surveillance, and eliminated with additional strikes. Others who tried to retreat back toward their initial routes were intercepted and destroyed by Ukrainian fire. Ukrainian forces also neutralized Russian support elements, destroying multiple artillery systems, including a TOS-1 intended to provide breakthrough firepower. Electronic warfare units suppressed over 160 Russian drones, blinding their reconnaissance and striking capabilities, further isolating the assault groups. Ukraine's tank brigades are disappearing. The army is getting new heavy mechanized brigades that are better for the infantry-first fighting. The famed 1st Tank Brigade is the third of Ukraine's 5 tank brigades to undergo the transformation. After its reorganization, the brigade now has just 2, ostensibly 31 tank battalions instead of 3, but has added a 2nd mechanized battalion with, on paper, 31 infantry fighting vehicles. Big, cumbersome, easy-to-spot tanks are just too vulnerable to the tiny first-person view drones that are everywhere all the time, all along the front line. The reduced time between detection and engagement, driven by real-time drone surveillance and the high velocity of FPV attack drones, has created a hostile environment for traditional armored platforms on the battlefield, Ukrainian analysis group Frontintelligence Insight explained. Prior to the reorganization, the brigade operated T-64 and T-72 tanks and BMP fighting vehicles. Its equipment may change as its structure changes. It's the latest chapter in the long history of a legendary brigade which fought in some of the hardest battles of the initial Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014, and, as the invasion widened 8 years later, won a decisive battle in the city of Chernihiv, 100 kilometers north of Kyiv and just 60 kilometers from the border with Russia. Russian commanders assumed the 1st Tank Brigade would be an easy target on day 1 of the wider war. In the early morning hours of February 24th, Russian missiles and artillery struck the permanent garrisons of many of Ukraine's ground combat brigades. But these brigades, including the 1st Tank Brigade, had dispersed. The Russian bombardment mostly destroyed empty buildings. The 1st Tank Brigade's several thousand troopers and roughly 100 T-64 tanks lay in wait in the fields and forests surrounding Chernihiv. The Russian 41st Combined Arms Army barreled south from its staging areas around the Belarus-Russia border, quickly arriving at Chernihiv. On paper, the 41st CAA, with its 20,000 troops and hundreds of T-72 tanks, vastly outmatched the 1st Tank Brigade. The autoloader in the 3-person T-64 and the Ukrainian Army's superior training made the most difference in the chaotic early fights around Chernihiv. The first days of fighting saw numerous meeting engagements in forests at around 100 meters to 200 meters range, where restricted movement limited the Russian ability to bring their mass to bear against a specific tactical situation. Better crew training combined with short-ranged engagements where their armament was competitive, and the faster autoloader on the T-64 allowed Ukrainian tank crews to achieve significant damage against surprised Russian units. The 1st Tank Brigade bled the 41st CAA for several days until Russian commanders decided simply to bypass Chernihiv. As Russian battalions rolled past, the 1st Tank Brigade found itself encircled. A territorial brigade garrisoned in Chernihiv screened the 1st Tank Brigade's T-64s as the brigade adopted an all-around defense of the city. For 6 weeks, the brigade and its supporting territorials held out. Communication with the 1st Tank Brigade was maintained along a small supply road running northwards on the left bank of the Dnipro River that the Russians failed to sever, despite having an overwhelming force presence. The Russian army ultimately failed to capture Kyiv and bring the war to a swift end. In late March, the Kremlin ordered its battered forces around the capital city to retreat. That's when the 1st Tank Brigade attacked. On March 31st, the brigade liberated the M01 highway connecting Chernihiv to Kyiv. The 1st Tank Brigade had won its hardest fight. But wider trends doomed its status as one of Ukraine's 5 tanks brigades, alongside the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 17th Tank Brigades. FPV drones haven't rendered tanks obsolete, but they have forced tank crews to operate extremely carefully, hiding most of the time in buildings or dugouts, and rolling out only occasionally to fire a few shells. Tanks are even more cautious now than they were last fall. Overall, there is less armor being deployed to the front, especially compared to 2023, Kirichenko said. So we are still in the era of the cautious tank. Or we could say that it has even gotten more cautious now.